Good evening, Rifters. This is Rifts and Rules, the 5e D&D podcast where we go through the many 5e books and talk about various rules to enhance your gameplay experience. I'm Nathan, the Dungeon Master of Riftwake.
And I'm Remy, a player on Riftwake and a Dungeon Master myself. And today we're here to talk to you about Elves. So part 3 of our series on the races of D&D. We now finish out the top trio of, humans, dwarves, and elves. And yeah, of course, we're going to get to more of the rest in the future, but now we at least finally get to finish off the big 3. So, elves. Long-lived, pointy-eared. I always debate how much to actually talk about the lore versus the actual rules in the game. So let me just go a different direction. So, Nathan, how would you just describe D&D elves?
Graceful, pointier, and better.
Oh, actually, having that better in there is actually a very important thing because that is an incredibly common trope when using elves, is the fact that they often are shown to have this massive superiority complex, which is always kind of odd to me because, like, in D&D, you generally don't actually see, like, sure, elves are long-lived and that is very good for them, but, like, you never really see a D&D world ruled by elves. Like, it's still always human-centric, and occasionally you might see something like the dwarves like I did, but I don't know. Like, it's just a thing that's always been kind of odd to me, is that elves do always have this superiority complex to them, and yet, like, they're never actually... to be blunt, I just kind of have an anti-elf bias. Like, it just kind of has to be said. Like, they've just never been as interesting. So I am going to go through all of the various types of elves in a little bit, but just as a precursor to that, holy shit, are there a lot of elves. Like, I haven't realized it because I haven't pulled up the elf sheet on D&D Beyond for quite a while since some new books have come out. There are, I don't know, how many are there? 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 types of elves now, apparently. And what's weird is that a lot of them are setting specific. Like, there's the Ereni elves for Eberron. There's the Valinar elves. There's a couple of new ones from the Wildemount book. Like, they just keep coming out with more types of elves, but they don't actually give them new powers a lot of the time. Like, there's fucking 3 types of wood elf now. So there is, like, the Ereni wood elf, the classical wood elf, and the Valinar wood elf. And I don't know, it's just a weird choice. Like, they get a different weapon proficiency maybe, but for the most part, they're all the freaking same. So the fact that they do just could still class these, because of the lore differences as their own category, like, I'm not going to go through the different types much because I'm not going to focus on, like, the various types of lore between the 3 types of wood elves. I'm going to read wood elf. I might mention the thing that is different, but I'm not going to read every single word for all 13 because that would take 2 hours and I just don't want to. So, that being said, let's go ahead and actually talk about what being an elf gives you. So, this is one of the races where there is actually a decent amount of variation between the subraces. You do have a lot of traits that elves in general get, but then the subrace will be like, oh, you get this instead of that, or you also get these things. And we'll be going into what that actually is momentarily. So first off, the traits that all elves get. So the typical ability score increase. Your dexterity increases by 2. So solid boost and totally fits with the whole elves being graceful shtick. One detail that is pretty neat is that a lot of people don't think about the lifespan of D&D races, although that is something that I find to be interesting. But there actually is an age information bracket in the stats about the race. And it mentions that an elf typically claims adulthood and an adult name around the age of 100 and can live to be 750 years old. So both numbers involved there are actually quite interesting to me. So first off, 750-year-old lifespan. So these are not the multi-millennia Tolkien elves. A D&D elf does live for a good number of centuries, but they are not the complete immortal unaging type of elf. 750 years, very respectable amount of time, but not immortal. I just think that that is an interesting fact. But even the other half of that, the fact that they are adults at the age of 100 is also just fascinating. So even though they do mature at the same speed as a human, physically speaking, but just that they are not considered adult until 100 is interesting. So there's no really great way to phrase this. So would that mean that elven laws would be that a 50-year-old elf, even though they are physically matured for 30 of those years, would be considered like statutory rape if D&D worlds have such a thing, if they were to sleep with a human? But anyway, I just thought that that was just a interesting fact, just that they are adults at 100 years old. So they are, yeah, that's just interesting to me. It's interesting to just think about kind of culturally of how you choose to use elves in your world. So if you have an elven adventurer character, how old are they? Is it the kind of thing where the elf PC is only 30 or 40 years old, and that they are just kind of on their walkabout to learn about the world, and that is why they're going adventuring? Or is it the kind of thing where they had a very sheltered life for their first 200 years? And, they may still just look to be 25 or so by human standards still, because they're still not even middle-aged for an elf. So even if they are, just past their second century, do they choose to go adventuring for a purpose? Is there something that has happened to them at that point to spark that desire? Or what have they been doing for 200 years? That is just one of the issues that I have with long-lived races in general. What are they doing? Did they have a career for that amount of a time? Just in a world where there are so many physical dangers out there, that trying to find that mental balance of, so does that just mean that all commoners in the world would eventually get to, I don't know, 3rd level, 5th level, 10th level? What is it about adventurers that makes them so much more powerful, when you do consider then that even someone who tries to live a peaceful life, if they are 200 years old, they would get into bar fights, they would get into scraps with guards at some point over that many years. So having level 1 elves, just it's always bugged me. And just, I don't even think that there really is any single solid answer that would be satisfactory for that dilemma that I have with them. Anyway, sorry, moving on from that. Medium size, 30-foot speed. So the speed is actually somewhat interesting, because elves are often portrayed as being, the fastest of the mortal races, and there are some of the subtypes of elf that do have the faster movement speed of 35 feet. But the base elf is only 30 feet, just as the same speed as a human or tiefling, just all the other medium type races. Well, except dwarves, because, dwarf. Anyway, dark vision. I have to say it. What do your elven eyes see? But what's kind of odd, just to someone who is, again, more used to the Tolkien elves, is the fact that a Elves' dark vision is the same 60 feet, same stats as every other character in the game that has dark vision. So it's the same as a tiefling has, the same as everyone else. Like, elves do not actually have any significant advantage when it comes to their eyes. On the other hand, what they do have is something called keen senses, which, as a racial ability, gives proficiency in the perception skill. So that is where they chose to focus it instead of giving, better dark vision or some other thing. So just all elves will get automatic proficiency in perception. Next up, Fey Ancestry. You have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. So that is actually really, really freaking good. So charmed is, usually referred to as the mind control type status effect, although the actual powers are usually much less bad than that for most of the lower level versions, but it's still just not great to have that happen to your character. So having a racial advantage on saving throws is quite nice. And magic not putting you to sleep, also not terrible, but considering that very, very few beings actually use the sleep spell, that is incredibly situational. But it is related to their next ability, trance. Elves don't sleep. Instead, they meditate deeply, remaining semi-conscious for 4 hours a day. So while meditating, you can dream after a fashion. Such dreams are actually mental exercises that have become reflexive through years of practice. Blah, blah, blah. You gain the same benefits as the long rest that a human does from 8 hours. So yeah, elves only need 4 hours a day in order to rest. And that is mechanically interesting. However, it's also one of those things that doesn't actually have a lot done with it. So, generally speaking, the party takes a long rest and then the next day happens. However, having trance, especially if you did have 2 elves in the party, would mean then that they would be the best suited to keep watch, because then everyone would get to sleep for 8 hours, except for the 2 elves, who would just have 4-hour shift, 4-hour sleep, and then swap. So, I don't know, it's just kind of odd that that is such a useful thing that just does not really get used a whole lot. Anyway, then languages, they just get Common as well as Elvish. So, like I said, there are a lot of subraces to Elf. So, just to list them, just to have it out there, there is the Eriny High Elf, the Eriny Wood Elf, Drow, Eladrin Variant, High Elf, Mark of Shadow Elf, Pallid Elf, Sea Elf, Shadar Kai, Valinar High Elf, Valinar Wood Elf, and Wood Elf. Oof, that's a lot. So, the Eriny elves are just, I want to say that those are the Eberron ones, but it's pretty much just the same as the normal High Elf and Wood Elf. So I'm not even going to actually bother going through it because it would be a waste of all of our time. Actually, wait a minute. No, I am going to mention something here because I just flip back and forth quickly just to see if there's any difference between them. And there actually is. So that's weird. I am paranoid now about this. So yeah. Fuck. All right, so I guess I do need to go through them because there are some minor differences. All right, so the Eriny High Elf. So in addition to the Dex bonus, you also have your intelligence score increased by 1. Then the difference, the bonus that just the Eriny Elves get, they can choose one skill or tool proficiency. Your proficiency bonus is doubled for any ability check you make that uses this chosen proficiency. That is actually incredibly significant. So that is the expertise feature for one skill or tool as a racial proficiency, which is interesting because then that means you get this at level 1, which I want to say, well, no, rogues also get expertise at level 1, come to think of it, but better than bards who get it a little later in life. But again, the fact that this is for any skill or tool could be incredibly useful if you want to build a certain style for a character that you're playing. Like if you wanted to play, elf that has amazing skill at picking locks, but you don't actually want to be a rogue, then this would be a way to give a character expertise with that tool. So that's actually really quite interesting. Also, cantrip. One cantrip of your choice from the wizard spell list. Intelligence is your spellcasting ability for it. So again, that pairs well with the fact that they do get that +1 to intelligence. But just to throw it because I can't not say it. Hey Nathan, what cantrip do you think that I would pick for a character?
Oh, I wonder. Prestidigitation.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, this would be a way to just give even a non-spellcasting character the ability to have the best cantrip in the game. Or, to be fair, because I know that there are other useful things, you could also have it be incredibly helpful for, let's say you have a melee character, that you could use this to at least give the character some ranged ability. So something like, Firebolt or just any of the ranged damage spells. And then they wouldn't need to carry, 4 javelins or what have you. Because a lot of those cantrips do have 120-foot range. So that would be a fantastic ranged option even for melee characters, considering that a cantrip will still, scale up with the character as they level. So can be quite helpful. Then finally, extra language. They learn an additional language in addition to their Elven and Common. Then we move on to the Arany Wood Elves, which increases Wisdom by 1, gives them that same expertise to a skill or tool, but the difference here between the Arany High and Wood Elves, they also get Fleet of Foot, which increases their base walking speed to 35 feet. So these are the fast guys. They also get a nifty ability, Mask of the Wild. You can attempt to hide, even when you are only lightly obscured by foliage, heavy rain, falling snow, mist, and other natural phenomena. So, normally, to be able to hide, you must just be unseen. But this allows you to try to hide, even if you're only lightly obscured. So that makes this a really good option for rogue-type characters who do want to hide more often. So next up, Dark Elves, aka Drow. This is honestly one of the more debated races in D&D, unfortunately. But they are really, really popular because they're cool. And, well, actually, you know what? Do you want to talk more about just the lore of Drow? Because Larth.
So the way Drow are seen is typically pretty much the case where they're pretty much all seen negatively and are treated as evil cultists, kind of elves that like dark colors, edgy, and also spiders.
The spiders. Good old Wolf. All right. Obviously, that is incredibly fucked up how Drow tend to be treated, especially if you do consider, how do I even phrase this? The real life parallels, especially now with the current events in the world, given that this is mid-June 2020. That's not okay. So having there be such obvious bias to one of the only dark-skinned races in D&D, that's no bueno. So as a DM, that's already not been a thing in my games because that's a dumb and fucked up situation what they have done with Drow over the years. But anyway, I don't want to get too much deeper into that right now. It is a depressing topic. Anyway, the actual abilities of Drow. So in addition to the dex bonus, their charisma goes up by 1. They gain superior dark vision to 120-foot radius, which makes them the race with the farthest ranged natural dark vision, which is incredibly helpful. Now we come to a feature that infuriates me. Sunlight sensitivity. You have disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight when you, the target of your attack, or whatever you're trying to perceive is in direct sunlight. I fucking hate that trait. So in D&D, a lot of the creatures that do primarily live underground have this disadvantage, and it's dumb. Sure, there do exist magic items that allow that to get mitigated, but there's no good reason for that. Just the idea of there actually being non-subterranean drow is just apparently not at all under consideration. It's not a sidebar that says you can choose to use this if drow are subterranean in your world. The fact that that is a, quote unquote mandatory trait of rules as written pisses me off. I say just anything that has sunlight sensitivity, just strike a line through that and just delete it. It is dumb. Moving past that rant. Drow magic. The dancing lights cantrip. When you reach 3rd level, you can cast the Fairy Fire spell once with this trait and regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. When you reach 5th level, you can cast the Darkness spell once with this trait and regain the ability when you finish a long rest. Charisma is your spellcasting modifier for these spells. This is nifty. I really enjoy races that actually just give you magical abilities even if you are not a spellcasting class. So Dancing Lights, useful because then that means that your party is never going to be just blind due to lack of light, as long as the drow in the party does have an action available to cast it. Fairy Fire also useful just because of the fact that it can grant advantage, which is always useful as well. Darkness, again, useful because if the enemy can't see, that gives you the ability to potentially attack them unseen or escape if you're in a particularly bad situation. One thing that is just also worth mentioning about that, however, just because a character has dark vision does not mean that they can actually see through darkness. That is almost exclusive to warlocks who have the invocation to see through magical darkness. Most characters, period, just PCs and NPCs, just flat out cannot see through magical darkness. So the drow themselves are still blinded by that ability if they do use it. And then finally, drow weapon training, they gain proficiency with rapiers, short swords, and hand crossbows. So that is also kind of nifty, but also super stereotypy, because that is very blatantly like the rogue's set of weapons. So even a drow that is not a rogue is good at roguey things. But having extra weapon proficiencies is not a bad thing. But if a player wanted to be a drow and just like, hey, could I just be a non-standard drow and have proficiency with, I don't know, a greatsword? Like, that's the kind of thing that I would just say is fine. But whether you want to use them as written, as always, your mileage may vary. Now, we'll move on to Eladrins. And there's 2 of them, which is actually a somewhat interesting story to me. So the one that is now referred to as the Eladrin variant is actually the first one to come to exist. So in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a section of like inventing new races and just like how to and why to do that. And so the example that they use is for Eladrin. But then later on, they actually added Eladrin as an official race in its own right with wildly different abilities in the Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. So it's a kind of weird situation. So I'm actually going to go through the original version, which is the variant first, and then I'll go to the more complicated version. So, ability score increase, they will get the normal dex as well as intelligence +1. They gain proficiency with longsword, short bow, and longbow. Useful. So that gives ranged and decent melee options to any character that does have that race. And then finally, Phase Step. You can cast the Misty Step spell once using this trait. You regain the ability to do so when you finish a short or long rest. That's super useful. Teleportation is super powerful. And what's even more interesting to me about that is that unlike the Drow abilities, which say you have to be 3rd or 5th level before you gain it, this you get at 1st level. And Misty Step is a 2nd level spell, meaning normally it is only a 3rd level character that would first gain access to it. But Eladrin, I guess, are just so in tune with magic and teleporty stuff that they can immediately have access to that at level 1, which is really valuable. And getting a free bonus action teleport every short rest can be very, very useful, to say the least. So now we'll go to the other type of Eladrin, the one from the Tome of Foes. So the other Eladrin here have sub-options of its own, which is seasonal based. So it is either an autumn, winter, spring, or summer Eladrin. And it's more complicated because they are able to change which they are associated with when finishing each long rest. And it's weird how they did this, because it says, you can have one for your entire life, or you can have it be what is season, like the actual season at the moment, or you can just have it be where, you might just pick what you want. It's weird how they just chose to do that, and I'm not super fond of it. Anyway, so all of this style of Eladrin will get their charisma score increased by 1. They have Phase Step as a bonus action, teleport 30 feet, and then can't do it again until they finish a short or long rest. So that's the same as the other one, except they don't call it the Misty Step spell. They just describe the effect, which is kind of odd. However, there is an additional aspect to it. When you reach 3rd level, your Phase Step gains an additional effect based on your season. If the effect requires a saving throw, it's DC 8 plus your proficiency plus charisma modifier. So, if you are an autumn Eladrin, immediately after you use your Phase Step, up to 2 creatures of your choice that you can see within 10 feet of you must succeed on a wisdom save or be charmed from you for a minute or until you or your companions deal any damage to it. So that's quite nifty. Winter. So again, all of these are when you use Phase Step, so I'm just going to stop reading that sentence. Creature of your choice that you can see within 5 feet of you before you teleport must succeed on a wisdom save or be frightened of you until the end of your turn. So as a quick reminder, a frightened creature has disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls while the source of the fear is within line of sight. So it doesn't matter if you're next to them, they just have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks if they can see you. That's really powerful. Plus, they also cannot willingly move closer to the source of the fear. Frightened is useful. Anyway, spring. After the teleport, you can touch one willing creature within 5 feet of you. That creature then teleports instead of you, appearing in an unoccupied space of your choice that you can see within 30 feet of you. That's awesome. So instead of you teleporting, you can touch a willing creature to teleport them up to 30 feet. That is super useful. Oh no, your friend is in jail. Shake their hand, teleport them out. Run. And summer. Immediately after Phase Step, each creature of your choice that you can see within 5 feet of you takes fire damage equal to your charisma modifier, minimum 1. That is also super cool. So as a summer Eladrin then, let's say that you are, a bard or warlock or just just a character with decent charisma. So if you have, a 16 charisma regardless of your class, then that would mean that just when you teleport, each creature of your choice, which means it's not automatically everyone, so you can choose to only have this affect enemies and not your allies, and just give them that automatic 3 fire damage, because it does not say they have to roll a saving throw. This is automatic damage, which is amazingly helpful. All right, so now we move on to the High Elf. So they will get Intelligence +1, that also elf weapon training, same as the other one, which is the longsword, short bow, longbow. Cantrip, pick a cantrip from the wizard spell list, use intelligence to cast it, and you get to speak, read, and write extra language. So pretty much the same as the Arani High Elf. However, the difference is that instead of having the expertise feature, they get the weapon proficiencies instead. So it's interesting trade-off, but for the most part, I could see where I would pick the expertise one. On the other hand, if you're a rogue, having the racial ability to use a longbow would be fantastically helpful, because that is honestly a thing that irks me. The fact that rogues don't have the ability to use longbows, because they should. Anyway, so next up we go to the Mark of Shadow Elf, which is the next up of the Dragon Mark type of races. So they have their charisma increased by 1, and then they also have a feature, Cunning Intuition. When you make a performance or stealth check, roll a d4 and add the number rolled to the ability check. Super useful, just flat out automatic, no consumable resource. They just get an extra d4 on those things. They also have Shape Shadows. The minor illusion cantrip. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast the invisibility spell once with this trait, and you regain the ability to cast it when you finish a long rest. Charisma is your spellcasting ability for these. That's a really useful pair of abilities. So, invisibility spell, just once a day without a spell slot, useful. Minor illusion, just fun. I very much enjoy that cantrip. It's no prestidigitation, but it's still quite good. Also, just the normal fact of Dragon Marks is that they grant you additional spells onto your list if you are just a spellcaster of some variety. So you get a lot of those kind of almost rogue-ish spells, I want to say. So you get something like Disguise Self, Silent Image, Pass Without Trace, Greater Invisibility. So just as you level up, it's up. Like, this is a really interesting option, I would say, just for a elf rogue, because having these magical abilities just are very useful. But if you are the Eldritch Trickster type of rogue, where you do gain the access to spells and to get these spells, real nice. All right, so now we're going to move on to one of the elves, one of the newer ones. So this is the Pallid Elf, which is from the Wildemount book, which actually I guess it's not super new anymore. There's even a newer book now. Anyway, they get a wisdom increase of 1. And they also have something very unique to them, incisive sense. You have advantage on investigation and insight checks. Holy shit, that's amazing. So they just flat out get advantage permanently on those 2 skills. That is nuts. So if you were to pair that with something like, which one was it? Fuck. The type of rogue that is the investigator. Why is my brain
Inquisitive.
Inquisitive. Thank you very much. The Inquisitive rogue. So that type of rogue relies a lot on insight checks to use its class abilities. So if you were to be that with this type of elf, to have advantage on all of those insight checks, that's a powerful combination. All right, and then finally they've got Blessing of the Moonweaver. The light cantrip. When you reach 3rd level, you can cast the sleep spell once with this trait and regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. When you reach 5th level, you can cast the invisibility spell, targeting yourself only, once with this trait and regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. Casting these spells with this trait doesn't require material components. Wisdom is your spellcasting ability for these spells. So that is quite nice all around because the light cantrip, just no concentration, 1 hour of light, super useful. Sleep, potentially useful to try to, get past someone without harming them. And invisibility, also just always useful. And the fact that they can be cast with no material components. So material components is not something that people think about a lot of the time because you'll usually just have, a wand or staff to not actually need any component. But this does mean that if you are in that unfortunate, you know, party is in jail type situation, that you can cast sleep without having a wand or without having the necessary component. Or you could have invisibility cast on yourself to just try to trick, a guard to opening your cell to search for clues, but you're there just invisible. Like with creative use, that could be amazingly helpful. All right, and next up, we've got the Sea Elves. So these are also from the new Wildemount book. So they gain a Constitution boost of 1 in addition to Dex. They also have Sea Elf training, gaining proficiency with the spear, trident, light crossbow, and net. So again, Sea Elves, that checks out. Child of the Sea, you have a swimming speed of 30 feet, and you can breathe air and water. That is super useful. But to not have to worry about drowning in water ever, just as an automatic level 1 feature, neat. Friend of the Sea. Using gestures and sounds, you can communicate simple ideas with any beast that has an innate swimming speed. You're Aquaman. Next, languages. You also can speak, read, and write Aquan. So I guess that is the water version of Primordial. All right, next up, the Shadar-kai. These ones are pretty neat to me, actually, because they're kind of necromantic themed, because their whole shtick is that they are sworn to the Raven Queen, who is one of the goddesses of death, and it's just cool. So if you want to be edgy elf, this is another fantastic way to do that. Anyway, Constitution score increases by 1. You have resistance to necrotic damage. Nifty. Blessing of the Raven Queen. As a bonus action, you can magically teleport up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see, and can't do so again until you finish a long rest. Starting at 3rd level, you also gain resistance to all damage when you teleport using this trait. Resistance lasts until the start of your next turn. During that time, you appear ghostly and translucent. That's fucking cool. All right. Next up, we've got the Valinor High Elves. Blah, 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 lore, I don't care. Okay, intelligence score increased by 1. You gain proficiency with the scimitar, double scimitar, longbow, and shortbow. So, for lore reasons, scimitars are a thing with them. Kind of neat, but okay. Cantrip, again, cantrip of your choice from the wizard spell list using intelligence to cast it. And an extra language, an extra language. Valinor Wood Elf. Wisdom score increased by 1. Proficiency with the scimitar, double scimitar, longbow, shortbow. See above. Fleet of Foot. So these guys also get that 35 feet movement speed. And also, much like the other types of wood elves, they also get Mask of the Wild, which lets them hide just when they are lightly obscured by natural phenomena. And then we move on finally to the last one, the good old classic wood elf. So same thing pretty much as above also. Their wisdom score increases by 1. Proficiency with the normal elven weapons, longbow, shortbow, long sword, short sword. Fleet of Foot, 35-foot walking speed, and again, you can hide when lightly obscured by natural phenomena. Whew, that was a lot of them. All right. In short, there is a whole lot of elves out there that are well suited to a whole lot of different characters. And if you just want to play a long-lived, dexterous type person, there's an elf for that.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Riffs and Rules. Please leave us a review and give us 5 stars on iTunes. Also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/riftwakepodcast. Tier stars low as $1, and even that much really helps us out. Supporters get benefits such as behind-the-scenes content, early access to the Patreon Discord, with your viewer chat with cast, and even a shout-out on the show. Find us on social media on Twitter at riftwakepodcast, on Facebook as riftwake, and on Reddit on the subreddit r/riftwakepodcast. And now send us an email, riffsandrules@gmail.com.
That's riffsandrules@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Bye.